The Dark Side of the Magic Kingdom. How Walt Disney became the tyrant behind America's dreams. December 15, 1966. Walt Disney lay dying in a hospital bed, but even in his final hours, he was obsessing over every detail of his empire. Nurses reported that he spent his last conscious moments drawing diagrams on the ceiling tiles above his bed, planning new attractions and calculating how to extract more money from families visiting his parks. The man who had created Mickey Mouse, brought joy to millions of children, and built an entertainment empire worth billions, was dying the same way he had lived, as a control freak who saw every person, including his own family, as either a tool to be used or an obstacle to be eliminated. What killed Walt Disney wasn't just lung cancer, it was a lifetime of toxic perfectionism, ruthless ambition, and a complete inability to see other people as anything more than components in his grand design. This is the Walt Disney story that destroys the magic forever. Not the kindly uncle figure from TV commercials or the visionary dreamer from corporate mythology. This is about a cold, calculating businessman who built his empire on the exploitation of others and the manipulation of childhood innocence for profit. Because Walt Disney wasn't a magical dreamer, he was America's most successful psychological manipulator. For 40 years, he convinced the world that he was creating happiness, while actually creating a business model based on emotional manipulation, worker exploitation, and the commodification of childhood itself. The man who would become Uncle Walt learned early that controlling people's emotions was the path to power and wealth. Walter Elias Disney was born in 1901 in Chicago to Elias Disney, a failed businessman who moved the family constantly in search of success, and Flora Call Disney, a former schoolteacher who struggled to hold the family together. Walt's childhood was marked by his father's violent temper, financial instability, and the constant fear that their lives could collapse at any moment. Young Walt learned that security came from control, and control came from understanding what people wanted to hear and see. He discovered that he had a talent for drawing and storytelling. But more importantly, he realized that these skills could be used to manipulate people's emotions and get what he wanted from them. Walt's early business ventures failed repeatedly, but each failure taught him valuable lessons about human psychology. He learned that people would pay money to escape reality, that parents would sacrifice financially to make their children happy, and that nostalgia and innocence were valuable commodities that could be manufactured and sold. Walt's creation of Mickey Mouse in 1928 wasn't just artistic inspiration, it was calculated market research. When Walt lost the rights to his first successful character, Oswald the Lucky Rabbit, to his business partner Charles Mintz, he was devastated, but determined never to be vulnerable again. The creation of Mickey Mouse was Walt's response to this betrayal. He would create a character that he owned completely, and that could never be taken away from him. But Mickey wasn't just a cartoon character. He was a carefully designed psychological weapon. Walt studied what made children and adults respond emotionally to characters, and he engineered Mickey to push every possible button. Mickey was innocent, but mischievous, helpless but resilient, childlike but wise. He was designed to make people feel protective, nostalgic, and emotionally attached. Most importantly, Walt understood that Mickey wasn't just a character. He was a brand that could be applied to anything and everything. From the beginning, Walt saw Mickey as a way to sell products, experiences, and emotions to the largest possible audience. The success of Mickey Mouse allowed Walt to build the most exploitative creative workplace in Hollywood. As Disney Studios grew throughout the 1930s, Walt established a workplace culture that was simultaneously creative and brutally exploitative. He demanded perfection from his employees, but paid them as little as possible. He encouraged competition between workers, but took credit for their innovations. He created an atmosphere where job security depended entirely on Walt's personal approval. Walt's animators worked 12 16-hour days for weeks at a time to meet his impossible deadlines. They were forbidden from forming unions, denied credit for their work, and fired without notice if they displeased Walt in any way. Many of the artists who created Disney's most beloved films lived in poverty while Walt became wealthy from their labor. "Walt treated us like we were lucky to be working for him," said Art Babbitt, one of Disney's most talented animators. He acted like creating cartoons was so much fun that we should be paying him for the privilege. But it wasn't fun. It was slavery, with a smile painted on it. The 1941 Disney animators' strike revealed the true nature of Walt's character. When Disney's animators finally organized and went on strike for better wages and working conditions, Walt's response revealed his complete contempt for the people who had made him wealthy. Instead of negotiating in good faith, Walt hired strikebreakers, threatened to close the studio, and personally attacked the strike leaders as communists and traitors. Walt took the strike as a personal betrayal. He couldn't understand why his employees weren't grateful for the opportunity to work for him, why they wanted more money when they should have been satisfied with the honor of creating Disney magic. The strike was eventually settled, but Walt never forgave the animators who had participated. He systematically drove many of them out of the company over the following years, replacing them with younger, more compliant workers who would accept his authoritarian management style without question. Walt's obsession with control extended far beyond his workplace into his personal relationships. Walt married Lillian Bounds in 1925, but their relationship was more like a business arrangement than a marriage. Lillian was expected to support Walt's career completely, never question his decisions, and maintain the perfect image of a Disney wife for public appearances. When Walt and Lillian adopted their daughters, Diane and Sharon, Walt treated them the same way he treated his employees, as extensions of his brand that needed to be carefully managed and controlled. The girls were required to be perfect Disney children in public, always well-behaved, always smiling, always reflecting positively on their father's image. Walt showed little genuine affection for his daughters and was largely absent from their daily lives. But he was obsessive about controlling their public appearances and ensuring that they never did anything that might damage the Disney brand. But Walt's most disturbing characteristic was his ability to manipulate children's psychology for profit. Walt understood, perhaps better than anyone in his generation, how children's minds worked and how their emotions could be manipulated for commercial purposes. He studied child psychology and used that knowledge to create entertainment that was designed not just to entertain children, but to create lifelong emotional attachments to Disney products. Disney films were carefully engineered to create specific emotional responses. The death of Bambi's mother, the terror of the evil queen in Snow White, the abandonment themes in Dumbo. These weren't just story elements, they were psychological triggers designed to make children feel vulnerable and then offer Disney products as comfort. Walt realized that children who were emotionally traumatized by Disney films would seek comfort in Disney merchandise, Disney parks, and Disney experiences for the rest of their lives. He was essentially creating customers by manipulating childhood trauma. Walt's plans for Disneyland revealed his vision of total environmental control over human behavior. When Walt began planning Disneyland in the early 1950s, he wasn't just creating an amusement park. He was designing a comprehensive system for controlling human behavior and extracting maximum profit from visitors. Every aspect of Disneyland was calculated to manipulate visitors' emotions and encourage spending. The layout forced visitors through specific paths that maximized their exposure to shops and concessions. The attractions were designed to create artificial scarcity and long wait times that increased the perceived value of the experience. Most insidiously, Walt designed Disneyland to exploit parents' love for their children. Parents were made to feel that denying their children Disney experiences was a form of neglect, that good parenting required financial sacrifice to Disney. The construction of Disneyland revealed Walt's willingness to destroy communities for his personal vision. To build Disneyland, Walt used his political connections to have the city of Anaheim condemn and destroy several established neighborhoods, displacing hundreds of families. The residents, many of them elderly or poor, were given minimal compensation and forced to relocate so that Walt could build his fantasy kingdom. Walt showed no concern for the displaced families. When asked about the community he had destroyed, Walt dismissed the criticism by saying that Disneyland would bring more value to the area than the homes he had torn down. This callous disregard for ordinary people became a pattern for Walt. He saw anyone who stood in the way of his vision as expendable, whether they were employees, neighbors, or entire communities. Walt's treatment of his employees at Disneyland was even more exploitative than at his studios. Disneyland employees were required to maintain perfect Disney character at all times, even when not working. They were paid minimum wage despite generating enormous profits for the company, forbidden from forming unions, and fired for any behavior that Walt deemed inconsistent with Disney values. Walt hired private investigators to spy on his employees' personal lives and fire anyone whose off-duty behavior might reflect poorly on Disney. Employees were required to sign contracts that gave Disney control over their personal appearance, their speech, and even their relationships. Working for Disney was like joining a cult, said a former Disneyland employee. Walt expected total devotion to him and his vision. He wanted employees who would sacrifice everything for the honor of working in his magic kingdom. Perhaps most disturbing were the persistent allegations about Walt's personal attitudes toward race and religion. Throughout his career, Walt was dogged by allegations of anti-Semitism and racism. Former employees reported that Walt regularly made derogatory comments about Jews and blamed Jewish executives for problems in the entertainment industry. Walt's films consistently portrayed racial minorities in stereotypical and demeaning ways, and he resisted pressure to include positive representations of non-white characters. When civil rights activists criticized Disney films for their racist content, Walt dismissed their concerns and refused to make changes. While Walt's defenders argue that his attitudes were typical of his generation, former employees reported that Walt's prejudices were more extreme and more actively expressed than those of his contemporaries. Walt's obsession with creating a perfect image led to increasingly paranoid and controlling behavior. As Disney's success grew, Walt became obsessed with protecting and controlling the Disney brand. He hired private investigators to monitor media coverage of Disney, threatened lawsuits against anyone who criticized the company, and used his political connections to pressure newspapers and magazines to provide only positive coverage. Walt also became paranoid about his employees, convinced that they were constantly plotting against him or trying to steal his ideas. He installed surveillance equipment in his offices, recorded conversations without permission, and maintained detailed files on his employees' personal lives. This paranoia extended to Walt's family relationships. He monitored his daughter's social activities, controlled their relationships, and expected them to serve as unpaid promoters for Disney products throughout their lives. The creation of Walt Disney World in Florida revealed the full extent of Walt's megalomania. Walt's plans for Walt Disney World weren't just about building a bigger theme park. They were about creating a completely controlled environment where he could experiment with social engineering on a massive scale. Walt envisioned Disney World as a place where he could control every aspect of visitors' experiences, from what they ate, to how they moved through space, to what emotions they felt at specific moments. He wanted to create a model community where Disney values were enforced through environmental design and behavioral manipulation. Walt used his political influence to get the Florida legislature to give Disney unprecedented governmental powers over its property, essentially creating a private kingdom where Walt's company could operate outside normal legal and regulatory constraints. Walt Disney's death in 1966 was caused by the same obsessions that had driven his success. Walt was a heavy smoker who ignored his doctor's advice about his health because he was too obsessed with his work to take time for medical care. He continued working, even when he was clearly seriously ill, convinced that only he could ensure Disney's continued success. In his final weeks, Walt was still trying to control every detail of Disney's operations from his hospital bed. He died not as a beloved entertainer, but as a control freak who couldn't let go of his empire even to save his own life. The Walt Disney Company's behavior after Walt's death revealed how thoroughly his toxic values had been embedded in the corporate culture. After Walt died, Disney continued his practices of employee exploitation, environmental manipulation, and aggressive brand protection. The company fought unions, minimized worker compensation, and used its political influence to protect its interests at the expense of communities and individuals. Disney's treatment of the communities around its theme parks, its response to criticism of its film's racial content, and its aggressive legal tactics against anyone who threatened its intellectual property, all reflected Walt's personal values and methods. Today, the Walt Disney Company is one of the most powerful media corporations in the world, but it's built on the foundation of Walt's exploitative vision. Disney's business model is still based on the psychological manipulation of children and the exploitation of workers. The company's theme parks continue to extract enormous profits from families while paying workers poverty wages. Disney's films continue to shape children's understanding of the world in ways that serve corporate interests. Most troubling, Disney has expanded Walt's vision of environmental control through its acquisition of media properties and its influence over popular culture. The company now has unprecedented power to shape how children understand reality, relationships, and their own desires. The real legacy of Walt Disney isn't the magic he created, it's the model he established for corporate manipulation of human psychology. Walt proved that childhood innocence could be manufactured and sold, that emotional manipulation could be disguised as entertainment, and that workers could be exploited as long as they were told they were part of something magical. Disney's success inspired countless other corporations to adopt similar strategies for manipulating consumer behavior and exploiting worker dedication. The Disney model of branding, environmental control, and emotional manipulation is now standard practice throughout the entertainment industry and beyond. Perhaps most importantly, Walt Disney's story reveals how American capitalism corrupts even our most innocent pleasures. Disney products aren't just entertainment. They're tools for shaping children's desires, values, and understanding of the world in ways that serve corporate interests. When we give Disney products to children, we're not just entertaining them, we're training them to be consumers and teaching them to find comfort in corporate manufactured emotions. The magic of Disney isn't real magic. It's sophisticated psychological manipulation designed to extract profit from human emotions. Walt Disney didn't create happiness. He created the illusion of happiness and sold it to people who were desperate for something real. He took genuine human needs for wonder, connection, and joy, and turned them into products that could never actually satisfy those needs, but would keep people coming back for more. Today, when we look at Disney products and theme parks, we should remember what we're really seeing. We're seeing the legacy of a man who viewed other people as resources to be exploited, who saw childhood as a market to be manipulated, and who built an empire on the commodification of innocence itself. Understanding Walt Disney's real story doesn't mean we can't enjoy Disney products, but it does mean we should be conscious of what we're really buying and what we're really teaching our children when we participate in Disney's manufactured magic. The true test of Walt Disney's legacy isn't whether he created entertainment that people enjoy. The true test is whether the world is better or worse because of the model he established for corporate control over human psychology. Worker exploitation disguised as magical employment, and the transformation of childhood itself into a profit center. What do you think? Does learning about Walt Disney's real character change how you view Disney products and theme parks? Share your thoughts about the responsibility corporations have when they market to children and the importance of understanding the real motivations behind the entertainment we consume. If this story disturbed you, subscribe for more untold truths about the powerful figures who shaped American culture, because understanding how we've been manipulated helps us make more conscious choices about the media and experiences we choose for ourselves and our families. Walt Disney proved that even our most innocent pleasures can be corrupted when profit becomes more important than people. And that's a lesson every generation needs to learn.